Welcome to part 3. If you are looking for a course that will guide you exactly what you need to get certified in food safety management system, this is your course. If you are an auditor looking to improve your audit skills and know which documents to look for, class by class, this is also your course. This is part 3 of 4. In part 1, we covered quality management system and introduction of the important highlights of clauses. So we recommend you check part 1. And part 2, we covered HSC, Health and Safety and Environment Management, with ISO 45001 and ISO 14001. And in class 3, we are covering food safety management system with ISO 22000. And this presentation explores how cold chain organizations globally pass stage 1 and stage 2 and sustain 0 findings across all the standards we are covering today. So we will show you everything. If you follow step by step, you will have 0 findings because all the documentation and all the practices are highlighted that you need to cover to be implementing world-class operational excellence. So again, we recommend that you check also other parts. After this part 3, we are going to cover part 4 is FSSC 22000. And we are going to give examples from New Zealand because New Zealand is known for excellence in all the parts, all the standards we mentioned. So we'll give you examples of the implementation in New Zealand, and then you can tailor it to your own organization and your own local regulatory requirements. All right, let's proceed with ISO 22000, Global Food Safety in Logistics and Distribution. Again, just to highlight, this is a specific audit course for cold storage and warehousing and logistics. Now, cold chain logistics and distribution organizations globally must ensure food safety, primarily by maintaining the integrity established by manufacturers. Controls are critical to prevent deterioration, as problems often cannot be corrected downstream. Once products leave your care down to the customer, the corrections there are not feasible. So now, adherence to international standards like ISO 22000 and local food safety regulations is paramount at this point. And in New Zealand context that we are going to give you example, this includes compliance with the Food Act of 2014 and MPI food safety programs. The core control areas here for global food safety in logistics and distributions. Organizations must establish robust controls across several key areas, mainly across temperature integrity, because maintaining cold chain from receiving to dispatch at this point, adhering to specified temperature requirements is paramount here. Example, in New Zealand, we must adhere to MPI temperature requirements. And in your local jurisdiction, you must also comply with the local requirements for the temperature control. Now, also we must control the hygiene to ensure cleanliness standards for facilities, equipment, and vehicle. Those are the control that we must maintain, a robust control for hygiene. In New Zealand example, we must adhere to MPI food control plans guidelines. Thus, you can reflect this to your local or regulatory requirements in your own country. And also the other control that we must implement robustly is segregation. Preventing cross-contaminations between product types is crucial for compliance with food safety legislations. Example, in New Zealand, is critical for compliance with Food Act 2014. which is the regulatory requirements here. Another control is a robust security, protecting products from deliberate contamination, aligning with ISO 22000 and broader biosecurity principles. Those are the key core control areas that we must maintain. So take a note of those and make sure you excel in it, and everything will be smooth. Now, the critical principles in logistics operations here: loss of control during storage or transport often cannot be corrected downstream. So we must keep that in mind. Within the supply chain, impacting retailers, if you lost the control, it will definitely impact the retailers. So organizations here in the cold chain, logistics and distribution, you bear the absolute responsibility during the custody. And this responsibility is enforced by national regulatory bodies and relevant legislations. So it's a requirement by the regulatory and legislation, and also international standards. For example, in New Zealand, this responsibility is enforced by MPI and relevant legislation impacting retailers like Foodstaff and Woolworth. So we need to adhere to the legislations. Let's look at the process flow for cold storage and transport. When we receive, we need to maintain the control in the interface, including the temperature. During the receiving, we need to conduct a robust check for receiving, inspection, and receiving note, and temperature control, and adherence to the requirements of the customer, of the legislation, and of the product. And then during the storage also, from receiving, we have a storage. We have to keep proper storage as per the requirements. And then during picking, we need to maintain the right picking, the right rotations, and the right cleanliness, and freedom from damage. And then during the dispatch, we also have to make sure that we don't cause cross-contamination between allergen and non-allergen, between cooked, ready-to-eat food and raw food. And during the transport, we have to maintain the temperature and make sure that we deliver intact quality. This is the process flow for cold storage and transportation. Now, each step in above here in the cold chain process must be assessed for temperature abuse risk, potential for cross-contamination, and physical damage that I just explained. And this aligns with global best practice for food safety and workplace safety. Organizations must comply with local food safety regulations and workplace safety guidelines. For instance, in New Zealand examples, this align with requirements under the Food Act 2014 and MPI's food safety programs and WorkSafe New Zealand guidelines for the safety of workers also. And controls are required at every transition point where custody change hands, which we call earlier as interface. So controls are required at each interface, ensuring compliance with food safety and workplace safety standards, while protecting product integrity for major retail chain. In New Zealand example again, this includes chains such as Foodstaff and Woolworth. Now let's have a look at hazard analysis in cold chain logistics. For cold chain operations globally, hazards analysis must reflect actual handling conditions and regional regulatory landscapes rather than theoretical manufacturing scenarios. It's different. It needs to be realistic and tailored and focused to the cold chain. The focus on hands that can realistically occur during storage and transport, aligning with international best practices and local legislative requirements. All right, so for instance, in New Zealand example that we are using, this involves aligning with MPI and WorkSafe New Zealand expectation and relevant legislation. So we must identify in our own country the applicable legislations and regulations and make sure we are 100% comply with them. Now, the hazards that we need to analyze, first including biological hazards, microbial growth from temperature abuse and condensation or extended storage beyond shelf life, necessitating adherence to food safety regulations. And for example, in New Zealand again, this includes mandate from the MPI Food Act 2014 and food regulations of 2015. So when we do our biological hazard analysis, we must consider the temperature, the duration, shelf life, and handling in relation to the products, but also we must follow the guidelines from the regulations. The second hazard we need to analyze chemical hazards, like refrigerant contaminations and cleaning chemical residues or pest control substances. These are requiring strict adherence to health and safety guidelines for hazardous materials, which are enforced by local regulations in our own countries. Example, in New Zealand, compliance involves WorkSafe New Zealand's approved Code of Practices and Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act of 1996, HSNO Act, managed by EPA. So we need to be aware of our local legislations and confirm the adherence. And then in physical hazard analysis, such as broken pallets and packaging damage and ice formations or foreign material introduction, this requires compliance with Occupational Health and Safety Act and good industry practices across logistics networks. Now let's have a look at prerequisite programs or PRPs in cold chain operations. PRPs here, or prerequisite programs, are the core control system for maintaining food safety and quality in logistics operations globally. So unlike manufacturing, where critical control points CCP often dominate, in cold chain, food safety often relies heavily on robust PRPs functioning consistently. So we need to keep this in mind. If we are combining our operations, if we have cold chain and we have manufacturing within our facilities, then we should know that PRP are as important as CCP in manufacturing, but they are not the same. That means the robust CCP in manufacturing is equivalent to robust PRPs in cold chain operations. So we must not mix that up and try to apply CCP here. Importantly, is stronger PRPs. So organizations must align with national food safety regulations again. That's very important. You must review and adhere to national regulations. For example, in New Zealand, this includes requirements under the Food Act of 2014 and MPI guidelines. One of the most important PRP is facility hygiene. This PRP, comprehensive cleaning schedule, and sanitation verifications and hygiene monitoring for cold rooms and ducts and common areas, is one of the most important PRPs that is similar to CCP in manufacturing. So we must adhere to that in line with the regulatory food prerequisite programs in our own jurisdiction. And then we have pest control PRP. It's very crucial. integrated pest management programs with monitoring devices and regular inspections and trend analysis, ensuring compliance with relevant legislations for chemical use. It's also crucial to maintain a robust pest control, which is similar to CCP in manufacturing. And then we have vehicle hygiene. It's also a very, very important PRP in cold chain operations. It's stringent or strict preloading inspection, cleaning protocols, and temperature verification before loading is crucial for distributing goods to retail chains. And then we have segregation rules are also very critical. Clear physical segregations of all allergens between raw and cooked products and incompatible goods during storage and transports to prevent cross-contamination. And then we have cleaning validation is also important PRP, such as ATP testing, and visual inspection and verification processes to ensure cleaning effectively achieves intended results. This supporting compliance for regulatory audits and certification bodies. So we must make sure these five PRP, facility hygiene, pest control, vehicle hygiene, segregation, and cleaning validations are robust and are in place for food safety in cold chain operations. All right, so take a note and make sure you review and you update your PRPs. Now let's look at the monitoring and excursion management in cold chain, the temperature excursion and monitoring in cold chains. Temperature monitoring systems in cold chain must be more than log data, okay? They must trigger immediate response when limits are exceeded. And we gave example in part 1 earlier, or part 2 also we gave a lot of examples of how we should implement a robust temperature monitoring, such as automated text messages, alarms, okay? Auditors and regulators body globally look for evidence that alarms are investigated, not just acknowledged, okay? Let me repeat that example again. For the alarm, let's assume that you deliver a consignment for five customers in refrigerated truck, and in like you are optimizing the road, so you are using same truck with 5 deliveries, and your driver will stop at each location to drop off and continue. But there, you must give your driver awareness to have a window of drop off and close the refrigerator before dealing with the current customers, to exchange documents or whatever job need to be done. The door need to be open and closed in a specified time to prevent temperature excursion. That's an example. All right. Another example, at 3 a.m., if your alarm went on, the text messages should go out to your maintenance, security, and quality manager at whatever time a.m., like 2, 3, 4, 5 a.m. And the response should be within the time. And if there is no backup generator to fix the temperature, then the products should be relocated until the fixes are done. All right, I'm just giving you an overview of these examples, but there are explanations that we said in previous parts. Now let's proceed. You have temperature mapping. So temperature mapping have to be implemented. It's very important. Zones must be mapped to identify hot and cold spots and validate monitoring accuracy. aligning with international food safety program requirements. For example, in New Zealand, this aligns with MPI food safety program requirements. Another management system is alarm limits, critical and warning limits set based on product requirements consistent with global food standards and industry best practices. And the example I gave here earlier, if your temperature limit is minus 18, so you set your temperature minus 18 degrees Celsius, so you set your temperature at minus 20 degrees Celsius, and you observe and you monitor and you analyze the trend. If the trend is driving toward the 20th, then during this analysis, you conduct the trend analysis. If the temperature is climbing up, then you apply the corrective measures, you investigate and apply corrective measures before it reached 18. But if the breakdown happen, then you need to apply. So you need to build up scenarios in case of breakup or in case of breakdown of the coolers. What do you do? All right. Now, another control measure is response actions, documented procedure for alarm response and escalation. So you see, in case of anything happen, you should have a predefined response, ensuring compliance with local health and safety and also food legislations. And for example, in New Zealand, this includes the New Zealand Health and Safety at Work Act of 2015 and Food Act of 2014. And then you have product disposition is another monitoring. Clear decision on product safety after excursion. You must have clear definition of what to do, guided by established food safety program and regulatory guidelines. For instance, in New Zealand, this is guided by MPI guidelines. So if you have a backup generator, then it should start automatically in case of a power off, or if the temperature breaks down and this become a hot area, you should have a backup zone where you need to relocate product until the maintenance complete. Now, failure patterns that you should avoid: alarm being acknowledged but not investigated, and product being released without proper assessment and leading to potential regulatory non-compliance. So try to avoid those practices. Now let's talk about the traceability in storage and transport. Traceability in cold storage and transport must be rapid and accurate. During recalls or investigations, speed matters more than documentation volume. Systems must quickly answer what product were stored, for how long, and under what conditions. All right, and there is a full advanced training on traceability. You can find it on our YouTube channel. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details here, but if you need more of how to implement robust traceability with a lot of examples that you can copy, just visit our YouTube channel and you will find that. Now, compliance with local food safety regulation is critical for this because it's a regulatory requirement. And for instance, in New Zealand, this includes the Food Act 2014 requirements. The traceability requirements: product identification and lot code, storage location by zone, by row, by pallet position, and duration of storage, and temperature conditions during storage, and dispatch records linked to transport, and one step forward and one step backward. So at all the time, you must know your products by lot, by number, where you are storing them, and where did you transport them, and what's the remaining amount, and temperature conditions. So in case of traceability, it must complete within set time frame. For example, in New Zealand, you must complete your traceability within 4 hours. All right? And you need to test your system as well. Drill. So, okay, you need to conduct drills. Can your organization identify all affected products within the time frame specified by local regulatory authorities for recall notifications? So you need to test that. For example, in New Zealand, you need to do it in 4 hours. So you need to conduct drills and keep improving until you achieve it within an hour or two. Now let's take a look at the complete checklist. All right. We will have a list of the complete checklist for ISO 22000, 2018 food safety management system, clause by clause. So if we start with clause 4.1, the requirement here is food safety context analysis. And we need to have it as a documented information. And this is mandatory. All right. And we need to keep the record reviews, should be reviewed annually, the food safety context analysis. Evidence that the auditor needs, they need the confirmation that issues are identified for context, such as cold chain integrity, customer food safety requirements, for example, major retailers, and regulatory requirements, and technology change relevant to cold chain logistics. For example, in New Zealand, this includes the Food Act of 2014 and MPI requirements and specific customer requirements like food safety or Woolworth. So issues must be identified and documented and keep with the record for a year. And then in clause 4.2, it requires you to identify interested parties register. So you need to have this document specific to food safety, and you need to review it annually at least and keep the records for 3 years. The auditors will look for evidence of customers, for example, major retailers and consumers and regulatory bodies and local authorities and occupational health and safety authorities and suppliers. All must be identified with food safety expectations. All right. And then in clause 4.3, this is a mandatory requirement. You must have a scope statement for food safety management system. And we have written one in part 1. So you can go and see the part 1 if you want to write the ideal food safety scope statement. Just go check out part 1 and you can write one down. Mandatory requirement, and you must retain it for the period of the certification. The audit evidence here will look that all sites products are product handled. The scope statement must identify all sites, including regional branches and product that you are handling, including chill and frozen food, and processes also must be identified in your statement, such as receiving and storage and dispatch. And exclusion also must be justified. All right, so that's kind of a statement. It must be complete and also accurate. And in clause 4.4, it requires the process map. You need to create a document for process map for food safety management system. And also you need to keep process records for 3 years. That's the requirement of clause 4.4. The auditors will look at your process map and your records to confirm that food safety management system processes are identified, such as prerequisite programs and HACCP and traceability and recall and verification. All must be identified in your process map. All right, and they must be aligned with your local regulations also. In New Zealand, those must be aligned with MPI regulations. That's class 4. Now we move to class 5 of ISO 22000-2018. Class 5.1. Here you are not required to create any documents, but you need leadership evidence. That still means that you need documents. You need evidence of leadership commitment. All right? So the top leadership engagement here. So when the auditors come, they will look for evidence that you must retain for 3 years to confirm that top management ensures food safety policy, objectives, resources, and foster a strong food safety culture and support food safety team. And then in class 5.2.1, which is mandatory requirement, you need to create food safety policy. And with this food safety policy, you need to review it and keep the records of the review. For the life of the certification, the auditor will look for the evidence that there is a commitment to meet food safety requirements and comply with relevant regulations and continual improvement and support food safety culture. So your policy, which is mandatory requirement, must indicate all that. And then in class 5.2.2, it requires communication records. All right, so you need to create a document to be a documented information. The communication records, like policy, must be communicated to all relevant and available to interested parties and understood by workers. All right, the communication records. And auditors will look for evidence that policy is communicated to all the levels. So you need to keep the records and available to interested parties and understood by workers. So also you need to include it in your induction and awareness sessions and toolbox talk. However you need to communicate it, you must document it, but awareness must be there. And proof when the auditor is interacting with workers, they should understand what safety policy is. And then in class 5.3, it requires you to create a document for responsibility metrics specific to food safety management system. And also you need to have assignment records, and you keep them for the duration of the employment and plus 3 years after their employment. The auditors here will look for evidence that food safety responsibility are assigned through your metrics and assignment records, including food safety team leaders and HACCP teams and QA staff and operations staff, aligning with organizational structure. That's class 5. Now, if we look at class 6 and 6.1, it requires you also to create a document for food safety risk register. And with this risk register, you need to review it annually and keep the records for 3 years. Auditors will look for your risk register and your review input and outputs to keep the evidence or to confirm that risks to food safety management system are identified within the operating environment and opportunities for environment are determined. All right. Now, in class 6.2, which is a mandatory requirement, you need to create objectives for the food safety. You need to have objectives, and your objectives must be monitored. And also monitoring documents are also mandatory requirements. So objectives and monitoring records are mandatory requirements. And your objectives must be SMART, because that's the evidence the auditor will look for. Your objectives must be SMART. For example, 100% temperature compliance. That's SMART objectives. Okay? And that's include, for example, minus 18 degrees Celsius for frozen and 0 to 4 degrees Celsius for chill. And 0 pathogen contamination and 100% traceability and recall capability under 2 hours. Those are SMART objectives that you need to set, and the auditor will need to verify that. And those are the requirements of clause 6.3. All right? 6.2. Now, we have clause 6. 6.3, and I need to confirm this. Wait, there is an error here. Just give me a second. Yep, in class 6.3, is for the change management procedures. You need to create change management procedures and keep the records for 3 years. And the auditor will confirm that the food safety impacts are assessed before any change to product or change to processes or change to equipment or change to suppliers. That is class 6. And now in class 7, class 7.1 requires you also to document the information or resources plan and the resources records and maintain them for 3 years. The auditor will look for evidence that adequate resources are allocated, including temperature monitoring equipment and calibrated thermometer compliance with the standards and cleaning equipment and pest control and trained staff. All these resources records must be kept, and also you must have a resources plan document kept. And clause 7.2 for food safety competence metrics is a mandatory requirements. So you need to create a food safety competence metrics along with training records, and you need to retain them for the duration of the employment plus 7 years, also mandatory. Auditors will look for evidence of competence requirements being defined in your metrics and your records, such as food safety awareness, temperature controls, hygiene practices, HACCP principles, training provided and verified for all personnel. So you need to keep your competence metrics and also your training records as evidence to meet clause 7.2. And then if we move to clause 7.3 for food safety awareness materials, that's a documented information you need to create and keep, the safety awareness materials, and also have safety awareness records and keep those records for 3 years. Auditors will look for evidence that workers are aware of food safety policy and their roles in food safety and consequences of non-conformance and common food safety hazards in the cold chain. So they must have awareness, and they must be trained, and they must be able to answer if interviewed. And then in clause 7.4, the requirement here is communication plan for food safety. So you need also to be a documented information, and also keep communication records. How are you communicating the food safety? Through the email, through the verbal, through the video, through the toolbox talk. However, you need to keep all the records for 3 years, because auditors will need evidence that effective internal and external food safety communication have been established within operations, including communication with regulatory bodies during incidences, also in case of emergency. And then in class 7.5, the requirements is to control the documents and records. So you must have a document pertaining the way you control your records and record versions, and you must keep records for 3 years. Auditors will look for evidence for food safety management system documents being controlled and controls being retained per the requirements with the minimum periods specified in ISO 22000 and additional legal requirements also in your own jurisdiction. That's clause 7. Now we move to clause 8. Clause 8.1. It requires you to create procedures for operational control. And along with the procedures, you need operational records and retain them for 3 years. And here, the auditors will look for processes being planned and controlled to meet food safety requirements, specific for cold storage and logistics. And then in clause 8.2 is mandatory requirements to have PRP procedures. And also is mandatory requirements to have PRP monitoring records for 3 years duration. And here, it requires the auditors will look for evidence that PRPs are established for operations, including infrastructure maintenance and cleaning and sanitations and pest control and personal hygiene and temperature control and water quality and waste management, supplier approval, traceability, allergen management, if applicable. All must be established. Okay, all these PRPs must be established and must be monitored. So it's a requirement to have procedures and also to have monitoring in compliance with your regulatory requirements. And then in clause 8.3, in clause 8.3, also mandatory requirements to have procedures for traceability, mandatory, okay? And also is mandatory to have traceability records and retain them for the life of the product plus 6 months, mandatory also. Auditors will look for those documents and also verifications in your facility to confirm the evidence that systems are able to identify the requirement for incoming products such as supplier, dispatch or receipt and dates, and storage locations and durations, and outgoing products such as for customers or batch or dispatch time, and traceability must be tested, so you must have mock recalls records with you. And then in clause 8.4.1 is for HACCP plan, mandatory also in food safety to have HACCP plan. And also is mandatory to have HACCP records. And auditors would look for evidence of HACCP systems being established following Codex principles and relevant guidelines and tailored for cold storage and logistics. And also as per your jurisdiction. And then in clause 4.2, clause 8.4.2 is a mandatory requirement also. You need to have hazard analysis document. And with this hazard analysis, it's also mandatory to have records of your hazard analysis. And auditors will look for evidence that all hazards are identified, including biological, chemical, and physical hazards relevant to the cold chain, with severity and likelihood being assessed, and control measures being determined to significant hazards. And then in clause 4.3, you need to have document for validation studies. And here the validation records are mandatory to keep them for the life of the process, plus for the life of process. And the auditor will look for evidence that control measures are validated before implementing and after change, such as temperature time studies, all right, and challenge testing if applicable. And if you want to know how to conduct this, we also have in-depth training in our on our YouTube channel that you can visit and check for validation and verification and monitoring. We have an entire training, advanced training that you can see how to do it also. So you must have all these documents for specific conditions, okay? And in clause 8.5.4, it requires products description and process flow diagrams and intended use. Again, we have HACCP training in our on our YouTube, advanced HACCP implementation. You can see also how to conduct HACCP. So this is the requirement of clause 8.5.1 to have product description and product flow diagrams and intended use. So you need HACCP preliminary documents and retain them for 3 years. And here, it requires to provide evidence with products being described, including temperature requirements, shelf life, and flow diagram verified on site. You know that's part of the HACCP steps, right? To verify on site. You must show documents also. And intended use being defined, and HACCP team must be competent in food safety landscape. All right? And then in clause 8.5.2, it requires hazards analysis worksheet. Worksheet of hazard analysis is a mandatory requirement. And along with it, you need to have hazard analysis also mandatory requirements and retain it for 3 years. Auditors will look for those evidence to confirm that hazards are identified for each process step in operations, and significance is determined of each hazard, and control measures are selected. So you need to keep those documents. And then in clause 8.5.3, you need to create a documents for validation protocols and results, and you need to keep validation records, and this is mandatory requirement for the life of the process. And here the auditor will look for evidence to confirm that control measures combinations are validated to achieve intended control within operating parameters. And then in clause 8.5.4, mandatory requirement to have HACCP plan. And here HACCP plans and mandatory requirements to retain it for the current version plus 3 years. And here the auditors will confirm CCPs being identified, if any, and often you don't have in storage logistics, but you will have PRPs. And critical limits are defined, and monitoring procedures and corrective actions and verification procedures relevant to the cold chain. And then you have 8.6, class 8.6, okay? It requires you to have procedures for updates and also keep the records. And here, those updates and records, the auditor will look for evidence, as evidence with PRPs and hazard analysis and CCP plans being updated when new products for markets or process change or equipment change and new hazard information or regulatory updates. So when change happen, you need to keep updates. And when you keep updates, you need to keep records as evidence. And then in class 8.7, it requires you to create procedure for calibration and create a schedule for calibration also. So you need to have procedure and you need to have calibration documents. And along with them, you need to have calibration records, such as certifications and so on. And you need to keep them for the lifetime of the equipment plus 3 years, and this is a mandatory requirement. And for auditors, they will look for evidence to confirm that temperature monitoring equipment are calibrated, such as thermometer and data logger, and calibration are traceable to national standards, so you must comply with your national standards, and frequency appropriate for the environment. Example, in New Zealand, you have traceability to New Zealand national standards appropriate to New Zealand environment. And then in clause 8.8, it requires you to create procedure for verification. And along with your procedures, you need to keep records of verification too, but this is mandatory requirements to be retained for 3 years. And then the auditor will look for evidence that verification activities such as internal audits and monitoring record review and calibration verifications and trend analysis and testing, if applicable, for this, all must be evidence that those verifications are taking place. All right? And then in class 8.9, it requires non-conformance and corrective actions procedures, and those procedures are mandatory requirements. And along with non-conformance and corrective action procedures, you need non-conformance records, and also mandatory, and you need to retain them for 3 years. The auditor will need evidence here to confirm that temperature excursions are handled systematically, including product being quarantined and safety being assessed and disposition being decided, either to release or rework or destroy, and customers being notified, and root cause analysis being investigated, and corrective actions being taken. So all these must be evidence through your records and procedures. And then that's clause 8. Now we move to clause 9. In clause 9.1, it requires you to have documented information of monitoring plan. And also you need to keep monitoring records, very important. Retain them for 3 years also. Auditor here will look for evidence that food safety management system performance are monitored, such as PRP compliance, CCP compliance, if you have CCP, but definitely you don't, and temperature excursions, and customer complaints, and audit results. And then in clause 9.2, it requires internal audit procedure for FSMS and audit records, and this is a mandatory requirement to be retained for 3 years. And here, auditor will look for evidence that food safety management system audit covers all requirements annually, and auditors are competent in food safety and HACCP, and non-conformances are corrected. And then in clause 9.3, it requires management review procedure, so you have to have it as a documented information. And it's mandatory to have records of management review and retain them for 3 years. Auditors will look for evidence that reviews are conducted minimum annually, and all required input such as food safety performance and audits and incidents and changes are considered within the context. And decisions are documented. All right? That's clause 9. And then in clause 10, clause 10.1, you need procedure also to create procedure for corrective actions. And here, the records of corrective actions are mandatory to be retained for 3 years. Auditors will look for evidence that food safety conformities, food safety non-conformities are addressed, and root causes are identified, and corrective actions are effective, and FSMS is updated. And then in clause 10.2, it requires you to implement improvement initiatives and keep the records of your improvement. Auditors also look for evidence here that FSMS effectiveness is improving, including reduced excursions, improved monitoring, enhanced controls within the cold chains. And finally, in clause 10.3, it requires you to update the records and keep the updated record for 3 years. And here the auditor will look for evidence that food safety management system is updated based on management review outputs, verification results, analysis of data, corrective actions, and new regulatory requirements. So those are every documents you need to excel in your food safety management system. All right? Pause and take note, pause and take note. And this is everything you need, starting from class 4.1 all the way down to class 10.3. So you have everything you need to pass the audit. And now, let's look at the stage 1 audit of ISO 22000. All right? For cold storage and logistics operation globally, the ISO 22000 is stage 1 audit for food safety rigorously focus on design of your hazard analysis and critical control point systems, prerequisite programs, PRP structure, and monitoring approach. Now think about that part. So that will be the main focus in stage 1, all right? They will focus on the design of your HACCP and your PRPs and your monitoring approach. These are the main focus that you need to think about and we will now facilitate how to get through it. Okay? Auditors, often accredited by bodies, will assess whether your hazards analysis accurately reflect local logistics realities and if the proposed controls are appropriate and aligned with local food safety regulatory requirements. So they will assess that. Is it the way you are describing your logistics? Is it in compliance with local realities? And are you complying with local legislations? Always, as we said, legislation, legislations, legislation, regulatory, regulatory, regulatory. Always, comply with your regulatories. And if you comply and you take the guideline of the regulatory and you combine it with ISO 22000, that's it. That's all you need. Now, this is where they will focus first. They will focus on your HACCP or hazard analysis. They will conduct a comprehensive review of hazard identification in stage 1. Mainly, that's what they do. With significance determination, all right? So they want to see biological and chemical and physical hazards relevant to the cold chain. So we must have each being determined. And control selection for storage and transports and considering local environment factors. So that should be our focus. And then they also conduct prerequisite program assessment to see if we are covering the essential practices like hygiene and pest control, and that is specific to the local conditions. They want to see the segregations. They want to see like the vehicle management, and they want to see if we comply with the food safety programs and occupational health and safety codes. So they will focus on that. They will assess those documents to see how are we implementing our PRPs. All right. And then also in stage 1, they will look at the monitoring system to look, for example, at critical control points, the temperature monitoring, if we are maintaining the chill or frozen range for local standards. They will review our documents and they will review our approaches. We will look at the cleaning verifications and whatever controls we have. And they want to see if they are thoroughly documented and capable of demonstrating ongoing effectiveness throughout the supply chain from producer to major retailers. So they will focus on that. And also, they will look at the traceability design. Importantly, in stage 1, that's what they do. They will look at traceability design. They will review your traceability system structure and capability of quick and rapid traceability within the time frame that is being determined by the local regulatories. And they want to see one step forward, one step backward. All right? And they just want to see the compliance with their local regulatories. All right. And now with stage 2, what do they do? In stage 2 audit, they verify that your food safety systems function as designed during actual operations within the local regulatory context. So now they want to compare. If they find everything documented very well, now they want to see, they want to observe, they want to interview, they want to walk the line to see if everything documented is compliant with the regulatory context, number 1. And they will spend more time here. They will look on the DAX, they will look at the receiving, they will look at the dispatching, they will look at the monitoring, they will look all your interfaces or your activities, spend time there to confirm that you comply with the regulatory and with the standards. So first, they will observe your cold storage practices, to look at your temperature management, your stock rotation, and segregation during storage operations to ensure that you adhere to food safety programs and cold chain standards. So they will spend a lot of time there observing, and then also they will spend verifying your duct operations during your receiving checks and loading procedure and temperature integrity at transition point to see if you align with your national legislations for food safety handling. And then they will also try to interview staff. They will definitely interview your staff, your operators, to assess their understanding on food safety and their responsibilities for occupational health and safety also, and specific safety training. So they will spend time also with your staff. And then also they will review the real-time records. So they don't need operation to stop. They want to see the operation ongoing, and then they want to see the real-time, the logs, okay? The corrective actions to verify that what is being recorded is what is being generated in real time. All right? Now, let's look at the common findings that you should avoid for ISO 22000. Understanding these common audit findings will help your organizations proactively address weaknesses before certification audits. And these patterns appear repeatedly across cold chain operations globally. Okay? Having generic hazard analysis is a common findings that you can avoid when hazard analysis are copied from template without consideration of actual products or your storage condition or your handling practices to operations. And this is a common findings that you can avoid. Then you have poor excursion handling, like temperature excursion being acknowledged, but it's not investigated and not addressed, and the root cause are not corrected. This is also another findings. The third finding is segregation control, weak segregation control. When allergen segregation rules exist on paper, but not enforced during the peak period, despite local regulations guidelines on allergen management. And mixed storage of, this is one of the dangerous findings and most common findings that you can avoid. Okay? Mixed storage of incompatible products observed, posing risk to consumer safety. And then you have also inadequate traceability testing. Another common also. Those could result in major findings, major non-conformance, and can delay your certification. So you know now how to avoid them. Here, the inadequate traceability testing means traceability system is designed but not tested under realistic recall scenarios. Okay? So you need, when you are conducting your recalls, you need to conduct in a realistic manner. Now, since those are the major findings, let's look at the excellence also. If you are doing these practices, you can sustain, and if not, you can also look forward to maintain or to incorporate. First, you have transportation excursion management. This is an external signal. When temperature excursion within cold chain operations are thoroughly investigated, adherence is strictly to relevant guidelines and legislations, and learning are systematically shared across shift to foster a robust food safety culture. This is one of the excellence practices that you can adapt. So you put a manager monitoring system in your transportation in case of any temperature excursion. You investigate it, you correct it, the root cause, and you share to prevent the recurrence with any other vehicle, and not only within, you share with it in the industry anonymously. Okay? And then you have having proactive trend reviews is also an excellent indicators that you can adapt or sustain if you're already doing it. When you have a regular review of temperature monitoring data and excursions and near misses to help you identify systematic issues in cold storage and logistics, enabling proactive adjustments to meet food safety programs requirements before external audits. And also, when you have proactive and preventive actions, it's also an excellent exercise that you can sustain. When you have a systematic improvements are implemented based on trend analysis and moving beyond reactive fixes to reinforce robust food safety management, this approach aligns with global best practices for workplace health and safety. All right. So all the best. Just review what we went through, take notes, all the audits and practices, and that's all you need to pass the audit, all right, to obtain your certification. But if you need, for example, how to implement HACCP or how to implement verification and validation studies and monitoring, or how to implement impact analysis, just visit our YouTube channel at Global HSC, at HSC 360 Global on YouTube, and type the course you want, and you are good to go. But if you already know what you want and you are only confused about the documentation and procedures, now you have the complete list to pass, and all the best. And now we will move to part 4. In part 4 here, we are going to cover FSSC 22000, and see you in part 4. So thank you and enjoy your time.